Good afternoon. This is Trevor Clark. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Nationwide Testing Association to our webinar. We have a special presenter for you today. It's Kim Clater. She's been with Nationwide Testing Association for about 29 years now. She's been working with FMCSA to train and educate different trucking companies nationwide on the clearinghouse that's going into effect this coming year. We're excited to get started, and we're excited to be working with you going into 2020. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to her, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, what we're going to do, we're going to follow an agenda, and it's a rather long presentation. So what we're going to try to do, we will try to keep this as close to the 45-minute time slot as we can. I will not read this totally verbatim, but I will hit on the very key points. And there's a little bit of background on the clearinghouse at the beginning, and then we're going to get into some of the meat. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So number one, what is the clearinghouse? I think most people do have a very good idea, but I will go over this. Number one, the clearinghouse is a database. It's established by FMCSA. It will contain CDL drivers, drug and alcohol program violations. It's also going to contain information on whether the drivers complete their return to duty and alcohol rehab process. And it's going to fall into two major categories in terms of the data. You're going to have reporting that goes into it, and then you're going to have queries. So you have different reporting requirements by different individuals and entities, the employers, SAPs, MROs, and some other agents, and then you're going to also have queries. And we will learn this afternoon the extent and scope of that. So tracking violations. So the current process, what brought this, basically into play, would basically be the current process, which is self-reporting. So right now, the way it stands, the drivers with the CDLs and the CLPs, they basically, when they're hired, when they go to the new employer, the employers have to ask those drivers, what is your previous employer safety history? They provide that information. The employers, in theory, are to exchange that, but that has not always been a very good system. So, FMCSA, this has been in the works for a while. They have decided that it would be really a more comprehensive and a much better process if we could have the employers, the SAPs, and the medical review officers actually reporting these directly into a federal database that could be tapped into by the employer, that we could determine where these individuals are that actually have the substance abuse history versus depending on those drivers to self-report. So in essence, that is what has actually created, that is what drove the database, the creation of the database. So the goal behind it is really to create a safer roadway. So you will have real-time access to reported violation information for authorized users. It's going to be easier for you to meet those pre-employment investigation obligations. Much more difficult for the drivers to conceal these violations. More insight into employer compliance with the drug and alcohol testing rules. And then we're going to get into the final rule. So the final rule was created by MAP 21, published December 5th, 2016. And the clearinghouse implementation date is January 6th, 2020. So we're going to talk more about that and what you're going to need to do and be ready for by January 6th, 2020. So again, this is the timeline. And we reference that. So where we are right now, registration has opened, and we'll get into that. We have registration open for the motor carriers, for the drivers. the implementation date when this all starts, January 6th, 2020. We have a post-implementation date, January 6th, 2023. And we will get into that as well, what that means. So let's get into using the clearinghouse. So who is required to use the clearinghouse? You have drivers that hold CDLs or CLPs, the Commercial Learner Permit. You have employers, you have TPAs, you have MROs, SAPs, and the state drivers licensing agencies. So right now the SDLAs have been put on hold. We really don't have a lot of the integrative technology yet. They thought that would be ready, but it is not ready. So we will focus on the drivers, the employers, the TPAs, the MROs, and the SAPs. This is a great chart. This is a chart that goes through the different actions that different users are going to be required to take. So you have the drivers. Everybody is going to be required to register as a user. So you have the drivers, employers, TPAs, MROs, and your SAPs all required to register. Now, we do have a little bit of a quirk with the driver registration, and we'll talk about that momentarily. Each employer, each TPA, MRO, and SAP can assign assistants. It is optional. The employers do need to select a TPA, and if you are an owner-operator, you are required to do that. So then you come over, you have driver consent, electronic for your full queries. Then you have paper consent for limited queries, and the employer is going to have to report certain drug and alcohol violations. SAPs have to report certain violations, and then we're going to drill down into that as far as some of the details on each one of these. The registration process. Now, as we go through these next slides, we're not going to spend a lot of time trying to read the small verbiage on the slide. Examples, these are actual screenshots of the different portals, and as you get into this, to actually get in and register, you have to create a login.gov account. It's really, pretty user-friendly. What we have found is what it's going to do once you go in there, it walks you through. It brings you up with very easy to follow step-by-step guidelines. It doesn't take but, typically just a few minutes. So the first thing you're going to have to do, what we have found with some of the motor carriers, they've tried to go in and register just with their FMCSA PIN number. You do have to go do a login.gov account. You can't go in just with your PIN number, so do keep that in mind. So you would want to go in and register. This is for everyone. And again, this gives you a little bit of a screenshot. It is a two-part authentication process. So registration and user verification. And again, it gives you an example of what that's going to look like if you have not already done that. And so after setting up your login, you're going to be asked about your credentials. Owner-operators are going to be asked to identify your TPA. Drivers are going to enter their CDL information. MROs, SAPs are going to need to certify that they meet Part 40 requirements. This is something new. They are going to have to be able to certify that. This is an example of the user dashboard. Now, up until basically earlier this week, this has not been available. They did just open up the availability to go ahead and purchase query plans if you want to. So the user dashboard is open now if you want to go ahead and purchase a query plan. And we'll get into details on that later on within the presentation. But you can do this. So really, there's just been a screenshot. You really couldn't get into this until just this week. So you'll be able to, once this is up and running in entirety, you'll go in through this particular dashboard. So again, things that the drivers can do, they can submit a petition to correct errors. And you're going to want to train your drivers to go in and look at their information. They want to make sure it's accurate. They're going to want to go ahead and check that on a regular basis, and they go through the data queue system. Just like the employers use data queue, drivers are going to use data queue too. So they're going to want to go ahead and review that. The employers are going to report certain types of information. We'll get into that momentarily. And the drivers can review that. And if anything is incorrect in terms of actual knowledge, certain types of refusal information, the drivers can submit a data queue on that. And again, this gives instructions for the drivers. Now, we have had quite a few questions for drivers that are very uncomfortable with the electronic registration process. If they are uncomfortable with that, what you may want to do is just bring the drivers in, sit them down, perhaps help them walk through that. Honestly, there's not a whole lot of other option with that. They will have to register electronically for the full queries. The limited queries, they can do paper. But for electronic, to do the full queries for pre-employment, there's no other option for that. And USDOT, FMCSA is really encouraging these drivers to go on and register right now. There is not an absolute requirement that the drivers have to register, but they are encouraging that they go on. They are registered now. It's taken care of before January 6th, because once they're in there, the employers, after January 6, 2020, the driver comes in for pre-hire, you're going to have to do a full query. And if they're not registered, they're going to have to sit down and register at that point. So it's a good idea. Go ahead and get these guys registered. This is their dashboard. This is what it will look like. And again, you'll be able to access this presentation. You can go back and study these. And it will give test details. And again, everything that's going to be reported are violations. Negatives will not be in here. This is only going to be violations, positives, refusals, return to duty tests, follow-up plans. Follow-up tests will not be in here, only follow-up plan completion information. So negative tests won't be in here. And this gives you an idea of what view pending and completed query requests will look like. And the drivers can go in, they can identify an SAP and look at their return to duty process status. And again, employers to register, it goes through this process, two-factor authentication verification. And the employers, we're going to spend a little bit of time with this. The employers are going to register in the clearinghouse, report drug and alcohol violations, request specific electronic consent from the driver to do full queries, limited queries annually. And if you find violations, then you go on up to a full query. You have to designate a TPA, and that allows the TPA to enter violation information or conduct queries on your behalf if you so choose. You have to report all return to duty information and then the completion of their follow-up testing plan. Now, this is something that is new, and employers, you do need to make sure that you understand this. One thing that FMCSA did require in Part 382-601, you do have to revise your current policy and your educational materials. There have always been 11 key components. In Part 382, they have added a 12th component. There is now a 12th component that requires the following information that has to be collected and maintained and reported in the clearinghouse. And this information has to be added in your substance abuse policy. And I do want to make a comment before we get into this. NTA clients, current NTA clients, we do have revised policies ready for you. You just need to contact us. We can get these policies out to you. We have revised policies. We have revised educational materials. Non-NTA clients, we have these available. They're ready to go. Just contact us and we can help you as well. But the information, the new information that has to be in the policy, verified positives, adulterated, substituted drug test results are going into the clearinghouse. Alcohol test above 04, refusals. And we're going to talk about what you guys have to understand about refusals. An employer's report of actual knowledge. Let's talk about this. This is super important. Employers, you're going to have to understand the definition of actual knowledge for the purpose of subpart B. What is actual knowledge? Because beginning January 6th, you have to report this into the clearinghouse. You're going to have 3 business days after the incident to report this. It would be when you know that a driver has used alcohol or controlled substances based on the employer's direct observation of the employee. This is not reasonable suspicion. This is something entirely different. This would be when you have basically more or less an incident where you have directly observed an employee use drugs or alcohol. This is not reasonable suspicion. It's entirely different. If you have obtained information from the previous employer, that's considered actual knowledge. If they have a traffic citation for driving a CNV while under the influence of alcohol or drugs, or an employee's admission of alcohol or drugs, except as provided as 382-121. Now, let's talk about this. I have been lucky enough to teach several of these classes in conjunction with several FMCSA agents. And the questions have come up on number 3. There have been 2 things. I want to clarify. This regulation isn't really clear. This is a traffic conviction, not a citation only. They can get a citation and it can be dismissed. You are to only report convictions. So if they are convicted of a traffic citation while they're driving a CNV while under the influence of alcohol or drugs, that is what you report to the clearinghouse. Now, if you have a policy where you have a voluntary self-identification policy, as outlined in 382-121, then you do not report these admissions of alcohol or drug abuse. If you do not have that built into your policy, you must report those admissions. And again, if you have questions on that, please hold those. And again, we can talk about that after the presentation, or you can contact us directly. Now, let's talk about what constitutes a refusal to test, because this is brand new. For the employer, you guys are going to have to report these. This is not new in terms of the regulations. It has always been there, but the employers are now going to have to report this. If the drivers fail to appear for a test except for a pre-employment within a reasonable time as determined by the employer, you're going to have to report it, except a pre-employment. If they fail to remain at the testing site until the test process is complete, this includes pre-employment, this exempts pre-employment unless the test process has already begun. So you've got a couple of qualifiers there. If they fail to provide a specimen, they simply just won't provide it. They say, I'm not going to do it, except for pre-employment unless the testing process has begun. These are all refusals to test. And again, I know this is new for you guys. If you ever have a situation that you're not sure about, contact us. And again, these are more refusals to test. If they refuse the direct observation, a monitored collection, that constitutes a refusal to test. The next one, this is typically going to be a process. If they do not provide sufficient urine and they've already gone through the process of the collectors notified the DER, you've gone through a medical evaluation through the MRO, there's been no medical explanation, that whole process has gone through, that is a refusal to test. If you fail or decline to take an additional drug or alcohol test that the collector or technician has directed, that is a refusal to test. If the MRO directs another test or any type of exam as part of that verification, that is a refusal to test. If they fail to cooperate with any part of the testing process, they don't follow the instructions of the collector or the BAT, that's a refusal to test. If they don't follow the observer's instructions in an observed collection, it's a refusal to test. If during a collection it's found they possess or wear a prosthetic device, it's a refusal to test. If the MRO, there's certain things the MRO report, this last one would really not fall under something you would report, that would be the MRO. And again, you get into having to list this in your policy for direct observation, and it kind of gets into direct observation definitions, and it clarifies the traffic citation. So again, you must understand as an employer the definition of actual knowledge, because these are things that you have to report into the clearinghouse. And I want you to remember, very important to understand refusals to test, because these are things the driver cannot challenge in data queue other than failure to appear. So this must be correct. And again, please, you would want to go back to, you can come to us, you can go to your TPA, wherever you need to go. It is very important you know this. This information must be provided to your driver. All of this information, the screen now, you have to put all of this in your new policy. These things have to be reported. You have to update the policy, distribute to the drivers, distribute to new hires moving forward. Please schedule training sessions with your drivers, review how this is going to work, help them register, make sure they understand what is going to happen. Give them time to ask questions and to understand this before January 6th. Okay, so let's move forward. And again, this is just a recap on this page of everything we just went through. Okay? All right, I know this is a lot of information, and again, I'm moving fairly quickly because we still have a good bit to go through. Let's get into the queries. Let's talk about the limited query and a full query. A limited query is going to be done annually on your currently employed drivers. If you do not find anything in the clearinghouse, then you do nothing else. You can do an ad hoc periodic check on the driver. If you do find something, then at that point you would continue on to do a full query. That's just pretty much up to you if you want to schedule that. The limited query, when you do your annual check, if you do find something, you have to move on to a full query. And one thing FMCSA has made clear, when you do your limited query and you pay the $1.25, if you find a violation and you have to move to a full query, you do not have to pay an extra $1.25. So that is one good thing. Every time you hire a new driver after January 6, 2020, you will have to do a pre-employment full query. So that is absolutely required. So you want to make sure that you do that. Okay? Consent requests, there's been a little bit of confusion on this. Full queries do absolutely require an electronic consent within the clearinghouse. Limited queries, you can have the sample paper consent. You can request it from the website, FMCSA website. That can be electronic, or it can be outside the clearinghouse on the wet signature. So you can do that either way. It's best, if you can, to try to do the electronic consent. That's just going to be best moving forward. Now, let's go over and look at action required. So it's rather interesting. On the full query, although FMCSA says that you cannot make them electronically register, if they will not register, that means you do not have consent to do the query. Therefore, you cannot hire them, and they cannot perform safety-sensitive functions, and they have to be removed. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. So the bottom line is they have to electronically consent for the full query for you to hire them. And then once you have a year out, January 6, 2021, and you're doing your limited query, your annual, if you have to move on to a full because of a violation, again, they have to electronically consent. Okay? And again, if you have questions, we can address that. And this is just a screenshot of what that is going to look like. And again, CTPA, third-party administrators. We can certainly enter this information for you. NTA is a third-party administrator. We can request consent from the driver on behalf of the employer. We can query the clearinghouse on behalf of the employer. And if you are a owner-operator, you must designate a TPA. And of course, we've already registered. NTA is out there. If you have not registered, you need to go ahead and do that, and you need to click and register NTA as your third-party administrator. And it needs to be spelled out, Nationwide Testing Association, Incorporated. And you will see a second one that is abbreviated, Nationwide Testing Association. It's an abbreviated version. Do not click on that. That is our MRO portion. So don't do that. So make sure you click on Nationwide Testing Association, totally spelled out, Incorporated, when you go to register. Okay, and then again, this is just what our screen looks like. You don't really necessarily need to see that. And how can we help? We can help make sure that you have your new policy, your driver educational materials. We're ready to go. We have it ready. I did have FMCSA take a look at our policy, making sure that it met the new number 12 requirements. So it does. It's been approved, ready to go. We can do your pre-employment queries, your annual queries, and we can help you sort through whatever problems that you might have in understanding what you have to report. You know, we do feel like initially, at least, until the employers get used to what they have to report, this is going to be, you know, most likely something that you're going to want to really turn to your TPA for help with. You know, please understand what you have to report. It's going to be really important, and we're here to help. We're right here to answer those questions and be here for you. And again, this is just goes through the MROs, their registration process. We're not going to spend a lot of time with that. And again, SAPs, they're going to be out there. Now, one thing I will say, please make sure, and this has been a problem in the past, and this will eliminate this. It's been a problem in the past that motor carriers have not always really understood that the SAP has to be DOT qualified. They do now. At this point, if your SAP is not in the clearinghouse, they're not DOT qualified. So you want to make sure they meet these qualifications, and they are required to register. And this just goes through those basic qualifications. And again, we'll kind of skip over this part. And then each one of these service agents can have assistants. And the driver's license agencies, again, they're going to be required to query the clearinghouse when the driver obtains, renews, upgrades. Again, this is not quite online yet, but it is coming. The National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, they typically investigate with major crashes. If, you know, I think everybody's heard of them. They will be able to access the clearinghouse on drivers involved in crashes, so they can take a look at that. There will be no fees for a driver to access their own record. Motor carriers will pay a fee, and we will come to that momentarily. But drivers can check their record as often as they want. And again, we really recommend it. When you do your training, please encourage these drivers to go in and check what's in the clearinghouse. You know, errors will be made, I'm sure, and want to make sure that anything that is in there is correct. Okay, here's what you're looking at. The one on the left is obviously for the super large motor carrier or company. This would be for companies like UPS, FedEx, the JB Hunts, that kind of thing, that would do lots of queries. You can come over, you can purchase, individually. You can purchase one if you want to. You can purchase in bundles. This is opened up. It has opened. So you can go ahead and purchase your bundles now, or you can wait. They do not expire. So if you go purchase the unlimited, it does. But if you come and you go and purchase the bundles of the individuals, they do roll over. And there is really, if you look over and do the math, there is not a bulk discount, as you can see. So it's $1.25 per query. And again, if you do a limited query that turns into a full query, you do not have to pay an extra $1.25. And this is something that I do want to point out. There is a change in terms of the chain of custody form and the ID information. One thing, the way that the information is going to be reported into the clearinghouse is not by Social Security number. They are going to be reporting by CDL number and state of issuance. So the guidance that FMCSA has issued is, in essence, they are requiring that the commercial driver's license be used instead of the Social Security number, and the employers, third-party administrators, collection sites, labs, MROs need to make sure that your data systems accommodate a donor ID number of up to 25 alphanumeric characters. So what does this mean? In accordance with 382.123b, the person completing the CCF needs to annotate the driver's CDL number and state of issuance in Step 1, Section 3 of the CCF, or Step 1B of the alcohol testing form for each FMCSA regulated test. So anything reported into the clearinghouse, you have to use the CDL number and the state of issuance. You do not use the Social Security number. So anything regarding the positives on the alcohol test, which is what the employers are going to be reporting, the violations, anything, refusals, actual knowledge, anything the MROs, anything the SAPs report, when the employers report return to duty, follow-up plan completion, SAPs put anything in there, you have to use that CDL number and that state of issuance. Okay? So we want to try to get used to transitioning away from those Social Security numbers. We're really trying to recommend that we do that now and switch over to that in the ID section. Okay? So let's move into our frequently asked questions section. Now, this is on the FMCSA website, and I do highly recommend, if you have not visited the FMCSA website under the clearinghouse section, please do. It's going to be broken down into the top 5 frequently asked questions for the clearinghouse, but you're going to drill down into some more detailed sections that are very helpful, and they are adding FAQs pretty much weekly. So please visit that after this presentation or as soon as you can. Some great info on there. Okay, so will violations that occurred prior to January 6, 2020 be reported? No, this is not retroactive. These violations everything starts January 6, 2020. So basically, you're going to have to do 2 types of things. So January 7th, 2020, you hire a new driver. You're going to have to check the clearinghouse. Then you're going to also have to do your paper previous employer safety history investigation. You're going to have to do that practice up until January 6, 2023. So January 7th, 2023 is when you can stop doing the paper previous employer safety history investigation for substance abuse. Until that time, you're going to have to do both because it is not retroactive. How long is the information retained? It's for 5 years unless the driver does not complete return to duty and follow-up testing. It stays in there indefinitely. So if the driver thinks he's going to skip out on that, it's not going to work anymore. It has to be completed. None of the other DOT modes are going to be available in the clearinghouse. This is FMCSA specific only. I've had questions about the ID field on the LabCorp form. People say it's not long enough for the CDL number. That's fine. I doubt that any of the labs are going to change that field because the other DOT agencies do not have anything like this. So it's fine. You just want to write that information out. It's not going to create an issue. Clearinghouse info is not going to appear in NHTSA's National Driver Register. So nothing will be in that registry. And again, this is the top 5 FAQs, and we've pretty much talked about most of this already. This is what I was talking about in terms of drilling down into these different areas. So, if you're a service agent, if you, want to get into really specific questions on queries and consent, this is a great area to get into. Do take some time and go visit this. Great information here. Here are more. Will every driver need to register? No, they only have to register if they need to provide consent. If they're currently with the employer and they don't ever incur a drug or alcohol violation and they never seek other employment, then they'll probably never need to register. That's very hypothetical, though. Can an employer register the driver? No, the driver has to register themselves. So again, if this is a situation where your drivers are very uncomfortable with computers, with electronics, or you're trying to hire the driver and he's very uncomfortable, you're just going to have to sit him down and help him walk through this. Non-CDL drivers are not involved with this. We've had these questions before. Are my non-CDL drivers involved with this? No. Part 382 only applies to CDL operators, thus that's all that's involved with this. Canadian and Mexican drivers that conduct operations in the United States, are they subject to clearinghouse requirements? Yes. Must Canadian and Mexican employers report those drug and alcohol program violations to the clearinghouse? Yes, if they operate in the United States. So the prospective or current employer of the CDL driver, to recap again, what do you have to report? You have to report all confirmed alcohol tests with a concentration of 0.4 or higher. Refusals to test for alcohol, refusals to test for drugs, not requiring a determination by the MRO. And remember, refer back to what we reviewed earlier. Actual knowledge as defined by 382.107, that the driver has used alcohol on duty, used alcohol within 4 hours of coming on duty, used alcohol prior to post-accident testing, or has used a controlled substance. So again, you've got to have a very good working knowledge of what actual knowledge means. You have to report as the employer negative return to duty test results, drug and alcohol, and then the completion of the follow-up testing plan. You don't have to put the follow-up test in there, only the completion. Service agent, acting on behalf, and again, it's the same thing, just acting on behalf of the employer or driver, same thing. Can the employer designate more than one TPA? Yes, it's very rare, but they can. And then who records positive alcohol results for the owner-operator? Their designated TPA. And the driver's follow-up testing plan is not available in the clearinghouse, and it is not tracked. And then how does the driver change or remove the data? Again, they petition through the data queue system. So remember, the accuracy of the information can be challenged, actual knowledge can be challenged, refusals cannot be challenged other than leaving the testing site. So you want to make sure that you're reporting correctly. The MRO is going to report verified positive, adulterated, substituted drug test results within 2 business days, and refusals as well. that fall under the MRO determination. And if a MRO changes a verified drug test, he has 1 business day. He or she has 1 business day to change that in the clearinghouse. SAPs, identification of driver, date of initial assessment by the close of the business day, and the date of determination of eligibility for return to duty testing by the close of the business day following that determination. So that's how they report. And we've already covered pretty much this information. So the outreach materials, it gives you this website. Please visit it. Lots of great information. Okay. So this is the end of our presentation. Please feel free to contact us. We're available. We have time between now and January 6th. We're certainly ready and able to help you. So we thank you for attending this afternoon.